On to our final speaker of the morning is Tshego Tshifhango. Tshego is a senior consultant at Mobius Consulting South Africa. She has a BCom Information Systems and Management and various certifications ranging from CSX to ISO 27001 implementer and lead auditor and ITIL, amongst others. She's got going on 6 years, I think, of experience in cybersecurity and information security assurance. She has been involved in an array of projects which exposed her to all the different aspects of security, including cyber audits, cyber gap assessments, doing NIST assessments type work, developing information security roadmaps. At a technical level, she's also got experience with control design and implementation across a range of technical areas such as data security, DevSecOps, incident management, etc. Tshego's current focus is on assisting one of our main clients with incident management, incident response, incident simulations, and just thinking about threat intelligence and threat hunting. She also gets involved across our various clients just to understand what processes and organizational structures they put in place around threat management. So I think this one for me is very interesting because threat management is a relatively new discipline, and so very interested to see what Tshego has put together for us. So over to you, Tshego.
Thank you, Ray. So as Ray mentioned, I'll be taking you through the Mobius threat management capability model. And essentially, this model sets out all the elements that are actually required to implement an effective threat management capability within an organization. But before we actually unpack it, let's first look at why we should be moving towards a more threat-based thinking approach to security. So according to IBM, threat management is a process used by cybersecurity professionals to prevent cyber attacks, detect cyber threats, and respond to security incidents. Now, if there's one thing that we all know and that is consistent in the world of cybersecurity, it's changed, be it changes introduced by the move to the cloud or remote working due to the pandemic, automation, or the integration of teams and systems. We can all agree that all these changes have made the protection of our environments more complex than ever. And moreover, these changes have also encouraged a mutation and evolution of known threats and risks. Thanks to the availability of emerging technologies such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, modern day cyber attacks have reached a level of sophistication and speed that is seemingly undermining standard security controls, resulting in these customized attacks going undetected and ultimately adversely impacting organizations. So how do we actually respond to this as cybersecurity professionals? Well, from our experience, we've noted that organizations simply need to evolve from taking a passive defense approach to a more proactive and predictive defense approach to threat management if they want to stay abreast of cyber criminals and prevent avoidable attacks. Now, in order to do this successfully, it's important that security teams adopt a threat-based approach and thinking when designing security controls. Although today's webinar is meant to help spark a new school of thought, it's also important for us to note and acknowledge that this whole threat-based approach to security is somewhat of a new discipline. In the past, we've seen that security teams have been taking a more risk-based approach to security. And while that has been useful in preparing for and preventing potential damages and losses, a lot of threat information has been slipping through the cracks and not being utilized intelligently, thus leading to advanced persistent threats thriving in environments. So I'm just going to qualify this by taking you through some of the observations we've encountered in our clients' environments. So we've seen quite a bit of information fragmentation due to inefficient understanding of existing services available, as well as tools and technologies and capabilities that are in place. This has led to a lot of blind spots, which compromise the ability to actually identify, protect, and respond against threats. We've also come across a lot of lack of relevant skills, and this is all because it's a new discipline. So security teams don't necessarily have the relevant skills required to actually manage their threats. And again, we've also noticed that due to COVID and remote working, there have been some new threats that have been introduced, and now those are also being exploited. The other thing that we've also noticed is threat actors have become more and more relentless. And according to Skybox Security in their 2020 trend report, they noted that there have been almost double the number of new threat attacks between 2019 and 2020. Again, we've also noted that sometimes the low-hanging fruit are sort of ignored. So we shouldn't, ignore the medium severity threats or risks, as they can sometimes actually cause the most exposure. And finally, we've also seen an increase in operational technology environments being exploited, as they usually tend to have purer maturity levels of security as compared to IT environments. Now, I just want everyone to note that these have been our observations. They're not necessarily the gospel truth, and they may not necessarily be applicable to everyone. But these observations certainly do highlight the point that security teams are yet to fully adopt the threat-based thinking approach to security and exploit all that it can offer to them. Now, the school of thought, when used to its fullest, allows security teams to use and mature tools and techniques, some of which were demonstrated by Rob and Bharat, of course, and these can be used to, proactively protect against threats. We have noticed that organizations actually invest a lot of money and resources into capabilities which are not fully exploited or being used to their fullest potential. Now, we're going to look at how we can actually go about changing that narrative and get to a point where we use threat information intelligently. So I'd like for us to actually unpack and understand what it is we need to make a threat management program or model work. So there are three key elements to this. It's processes, technology, as well as people. In terms of processes, we need to be able to develop processes which can help us identify threats, define threat hunting, threat reporting, and analysis processes, among others, of course, as well as identify where we can actually leverage on existing processes. I will obviously unpack this as well a bit later in the presentation. Secondly, we have technology. So the key thing here is to make sure that we ensure that we have the right technology in place and that we have the right systems in place, and where possible, we actually automate some of these processes. And finally, we have people. We need to be able to clearly define the roles and responsibilities that people play in making sure that threats are managed in an organization. And also ensuring that people actually have the right skills and the right skills, training, and qualifications required to actually manage threats in the organization. And also, we need to clearly define what those KPIs are in order to support those people who are managing the overall threat management process. Now, it's important to also note that defining those KPIs may be a bit challenging. As I've said before, threat management as a whole is a new discipline in comparison to its more matured counterparts, such as patch management, for example. So these three elements are just what's necessary at a bare minimum when implementing a threat management capability. They are meant to allow organization or security teams to stay informed on relevant threats, gain visibility on those threats, proactively protect against those threats, and also exhaust available resources to counter against attacks. And also, the overall objective is to make sure that there's a unified security threat framework, which allows for security teams to easily have a threat view and navigation of threat information, thus allowing for the intelligent use of information in protecting the environment. Now, the first of those three elements, as mentioned, is processes. So we've basically identified the 4 high-level processes which form part of the Mobius threat management capability model. And at a strategic level, we basically need to be able to have a clear view of what those threats are which are relevant to the organization. Now, this can be achieved through threat profiling, as Bharat has explained, as well as through the risk analysis activities. At a technical level, we need to be able to identify and also develop controls that are required to identify, protect, detect, respond, as well as recover from those threats that have been identified in the process above. Next, we have the operational level, which basically sets out the day-to-day activities that are required to manage identified threats. And also at this level, the ongoing threat detection and prevention activities are conducted, and information is actually collected, given a bit more context, and then used as a form of proactive threat management. Finally, we have at a technical level, we have processes at a technical level, and these consist of various threat monitoring, threat hunting activities, which are basically conducive for obtaining predictive threat information that will be useful for the ongoing threat monitoring. Next, we have the second element of our model, and this is the technology. This basically sets out the technology that's required to manage threats. And some of these, again, have been unpacked in detail by Rob, but let's just look at all the others that can be useful for this purpose. So we have threat hunting tools. These can be used for proactively searching for cyber threats that are lurking undetected in a network. We also have OSINT, which is open source threat intelligent sources. This was explained, I think, by Rob. And these can basically be used for collecting information from publicly accessible databases, the deep web, dark web, and so on. We also have threat intelligence services, such as Darktrace, for example, and these can be used to detect, investigate, and respond to threats. We also have ISACs. These are information sharing and analysis centers, and they are generally organizations which are dedicated to enhancing cybersecurity through collaborative sharing, and they're usually industry specific, and they facilitate the sharing and gathering of information. And likewise, we also have government and other adversaries, which, like ISACs, are committed to sharing information in an effort to enhance security and also drive the whole element of collaborative information gathering. Then we also have SIEM, SOCs, as well as SOARs, and these are platforms that are most likely pre-existing in an organization, and these can be used to help collect threat-related data from a range of sources and also automate the responses to those threats. We also have indicators of compromise, and these are generally meant to enable information security professionals to actually detect any intrusion attempts or other malicious activities that are happening. And finally, we have threat and incident management tools, which can aid in the overall tracking and reporting on incidents. Finally, we have the last element, which is the people aspect. Now, These are basically the people who are needed to make this whole model work. And at a strategic level, we have the key role players whose main responsibility in this is to provide strategic direction and provide overall support to the broader threat management team. The key players include the board of directors, executive managers, as well as the CIO. And their main role here is to basically set the tone at a strategic level and provide the threat management team resources that are required to build a threat management capability. And now, because of all of this, it's important that people at this level actually understand the importance of threat management and have a high-level view of their organization's threat landscape, so that it can be easier to actually get their buy-in and support for the overall threat management program. At a technical level, we have the information security officer and managers, as well as the risk officers. Now, they are primarily responsible for ensuring that the threat management strategy set by the organizational leaders is actually implemented. They are responsible for developing a threat management program, which will guide the operational teams. Now, the risk officer's role here should not be undermined in this model, as they will play a very key role in ensuring that all those identified threats are actually acknowledged and formally registered so they can be managed and remediated accordingly. Finally, at a technical level, we have the technical team. They actually sit at both the operational and technical level, and their key responsibilities are to basically manage the day-to-day activities that are required to manage threats on an ongoing basis. This involves conducting threat hunting, pen testing, threat monitoring activities, among others, of course. Now, the key to getting the people part of this model correct is to ensure that there is a dedicated team that is primarily focused on ensuring that threats are mitigated in order to protect the organization. Now, let us look at how all these elements actually come together. So this is basically a high-level view of the threat management capability model, which was developed by Mobius. And this model, as I've unpacked it throughout the presentation, basically sets out the minimum needs that are required to help an organization manage their threats. So unfortunately, this actually brings us to the end of my presentation. But as Raymond has mentioned, these slides will be available to you, and you'll be able to take a closer look at this model and how you can actually apply it in your own environment. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Tshego. Sorry, I was just answering a question there. So thank you very much. It's very interesting, and I think I haven't seen anything out there that that sort of defines how we should build a threat management capability. So thank you very much. And as you said, it is a relatively new discipline within cybersecurity. So very interesting that you've gone and done that research and looked at what all our clients are doing. I don't know if there are any specific questions around the model. I've got one question from Rafa that said, what is the correct size of an IT security team for an organization? I don't know if you're able to give us your thoughts around that, Tshego. I don't think Rafa is talking specifically around threat team, but just generally, I don't know if there's an easy way to answer that, but I don't know if you want to give it a go.
Sorry, Ray, what is the size of a team? So I didn't catch your question.
Yeah, so Rafa's question is, what is the correct size of an IT security team for an organization?
Well, I don't think there's a one size fits all type of response. I think that's relative to the organization and the capacity they need to manage their security capabilities.
Okay, yeah, I think so too. I think it really depends on the type of organization, the size of organization, the threats, the critical assets, You can have a small organization that deals with highly sensitive information and highly critical systems. So your security team might be slightly bigger, and you might have a large organization that doesn't deal with any critical systems or information. So you might have a smaller team. So it really depends on what your organization does, the size of your organization, the geographical spread, your critical systems, the threats. So I think it is quite a broad question to answer. I've got a question from my side. So why do you think organizations are battling with the implementation around threat management, and why is it so important to get this right, Tshego? I know you have been having a look at some of the statistics out there, so maybe just if you can give us some insights around that.
Yeah, so I think, Ray, as I had mentioned, over and over in the presentation, is that, well, for starters, it is a new discipline. I think, overall, security teams have been sort of using this whole risk-based approach to managing security in their organizations. And the whole idea of threat-based or taking a threat-based approach is quite new. And it's so new, like you mentioned, that even the SANS, SANS, has conducted a survey. And in their survey, they also identified that 51% of the organizations that were surveyed reported that they actually lacked the skilled staff and relevant training that was required to actually successfully perform any of those threat hunting activities, as well as other related activities. But again, it's important because organizations that do get this right see a significant improvement in their overall security posture when they take a threat-based approach to security. And also, I think it's important to mention that a threat-based approach to security sort of magnifies all the elements that could possibly make up an adverse or could relate to a negative impact or a vulnerability being exploited, and therefore adversely affecting an organization. So, as opposed to a risk-based approach that just focuses on, the potential damage, the importance of, making sure that we do get this right is that we need to be looking at what else over and above, the damage, what else can these threats bring into the environment.
Yeah, so that's the threat-based approach, isn't it? Yes, exactly. All right, so thank you very much, Tshego. I really appreciate it. I think it's really cool. And as I said, we will be distributing this presentation, so you'll get those slides and you can get those pictures. So yeah, if I can, we've got 3 minutes left or 2 minutes left. I've got one question I'd like to pose to the entire panel. I'm not sure what sort of answers we're going to get, but this was a very interesting question. So if you can just put your cameras on and mics on again. But a very interesting question from someone who said, from Sternly again, who said, what sort of turnaround time can we expect from our blue team who are expected to respond to a sort of 0-day attack or an alert that has no context? So Bharat put up that example of an alert with no context. How do we firstly deal with that, and then how do we go about adding the context? I suppose I'm not sure we can answer the turnaround time. So I don't know, Bharat, do you want to maybe give a shot at answering that? What do we do how do we go about looking at something without the correct context?
So we would need the context. So if we get an alert like this and we found it in our mails, for example, we would need to go to the controls and look at how the threats came to be. We would need to find the information, for example, the source and the destination of the attack, from which country it occurred, what was the time frame. So we would need to build this image first before we are able to tackle the threat. And that is going to consume precious time during the incident response. And that is the reason why we want our alerts to be very contextual and meaningful right from the start. Okay, perfect. And Tshego, just from a process perspective, I suppose, how would we then deal with something like that? We've got some what is the process we go through around initially getting some sort of alert without context to all the way through to responding to it?
Sorry, Ray. I missed your question there.
Just what sort of process would we follow from the time we first get alerted to this this incident to the time we actually take action, and who would typically be involved? So from a process and people perspective. I think we've lost Tshego there. Okay, not to worry. Okay, so thank you very much. We are a little out of time. Sternly, I hope that answers your question. I know there are some additional questions that we have on the board as well, but if anyone wants to put those questions through to us, you are welcome to contact us. I've got all the contact details up on the presentation at the moment. I think it was a very enlightening and interesting presentation. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Thank you to our organizers, Danilo. Thank you to our marketing team, in particular, Odette and Malalo, for all your assistance. And yeah, it was very interesting and exciting for me as well as MC. So thank you very much, everyone.